I'm live on everything. So, this is the ICDAME Burnout series. This is Andre Bright, an executive coach. And through the month of Mental Health Awareness Month, I have been sitting here talking to you about burnout every single day. And today is number 30 on that schedule. And it's been a really interesting journey, actually. I only have one more day left tomorrow, and then I'll decide after that what comes next, if anything. So today, though, I'm focusing on this. Hey, Michelle, welcome, welcome, welcome. Let me save this title on the Instagram. Okay, brilliant. So today I'm talking about 5 ways to complete your stress cycle during burnout recovery. Ooh, wait. I just realized I don't think. There we go. The audio should be working now. So, this is 5 ways to complete your stress cycle during burnout recovery. They say the reward for conquering a mountain is another mountain, right? But the problem with that is you never stop. And so when do you celebrate or reap your reward for going through the trial, the tribulation, whatever it is? I'm reading a book called Burnout by Emilia and Emily Nagoski, and it talks about completing the stress cycle. Um, and I just really want to share this because it's really important. It's something that I knew about, but I didn't really know about. But once I knew about it, I knew about it, if that makes sense. So is well, it depends on the version you read, but there's 4 stages I'm going to talk about. The first stage is when you're at rest. Okay, this is when you're chill, you're neutral, everything is fine, there's no threat, anything like that. Stage number 2 is when you notice there's a threat. So back in the day, that threat could have been an animal in the wild. It could be nowadays, it was probably like a deadline or an interview, for example, that you might have coming up, something that releases that stress hormone cortisol within your body. And then it builds up, right? The third stage is when you have some kind of response. And I won't say action because it's not necessarily that, but there'll be some kind of stress response. So that could be fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fight, if I was to do it this way, is when you feel like when you go into action and you challenge whatever it is that is challenging you, right? So you go for it. This could be because you pursue to conquer it, or the risk of not taking action is bigger than the risk of taking action. So yes, this thing could finish me, but if I don't, then the result will be much worse. That's fight. Flight is when it's the opposite. So you perceive the risk of taking action to be too great, and so you flee, you run away. And one of the things that I was saying this is that we often demonize the flight. The idea there's especially as a man, there's this idea of being chicken or a wuss or whatever. Um, and it's not, I don't think it is that actually. I think it's just being able to evaluate your scenario. Um, at no mountain power to keep me from these lies. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to these were meant to be today's live was meant to be much earlier, but so the idea of flight is that you perceive the threat to be too large for you to win, and then you flee, right? Um, and this is actually a preservation tactic. This is something so that you can fight another day. Right now, whatever it is, let's say, for example, you have imposter syndrome, right? And you don't do that application. That could be a sign that you need to get more training and that might need to get more experience, anything like that. If you are in an actual fight and someone comes to you and or you're in a conflict with someone who has more power, or you're just not ready to be in that kind of space, you just bowing down and say, okay, sure, you're right, is a self-defense mechanism. So it allows you to fight another day, right? But there's also freeze. And this is when the challenge of facing the stressor and the challenge of not facing the stressor are both equally large. And so what the body does is like it short circuits, it just fuses. And this can be, if you ever see someone experience something which is like highly stressful and then they faint, that is like the freeze. If you ever see someone, like the idea of a deer in headlights scenario, that's a freeze, right? So, and this can also look like someone says something to you that you feel offended by, but you can't speak, you don't respond, like you shut down and you just stand there. It can be like someone disrespecting you in a meeting or calling you out for something you haven't done, or that someone else has done, but they're laying the blame on you. And this happens a lot when you re- remember a scenario in hindsight, and then you have that feeling of, oh, I should have said this, done that. That is often the freeze that came up within that moment. In that moment, and we can only judge by how our body reacts in that moment, right? Because afterwards, when we're away from the threat, we can think all sorts. But in the moment, our body makes a judgment. What is the best thing to do? Should I attack and do something about this? Should I flee and get caught up anyway because I'm not fast enough to outrun it? Or should I just stand here and see what happens? And sometimes it happens. Like I've had this at work before. There's a really challenging deadline that's coming up, and I'm putting everything into completing this task or this deadline or this project. And I get to a stage where I just don't know how to complete it. Like there's something which is bigger than me and it's taking a lot of stress out of my life. So I sit there and I procrastinate, for example, and then I might get a call and say, actually, we don't need that thing anyway. Poof, big release. Now that doesn't necessarily happen, but that is an example. Procrastination is another example of the freeze where we don't take action at all. Fawn is very different. Fawn is where you try and appease the situation by effectively. So for example, let's say for example I'm on the road and I'm by myself, and there's like a group of people who are intimidating me, right? The fawn would look like me just saying or doing whatever they want me to do just so I can get out of there, right? I appease the situation. Okay, and this can apply to different things as well. You can imagine what that looks like at work or within the relationship. If you're someone who doesn't like conflict, you might avoid it by just saying whatever the other person wants to hear, right? The problem with this is, as an example of a response though, is that you don't get heard, you don't get your needs met. And what happens in a long period of time, it can build that stress within your body to the point where it builds resentment for the other person, but then more importantly, resentment for yourself for not standing up for yourself. And that is one of the, what I've found anyway, to be one of like the really hidden areas of burnout that I don't see talked about too much either, is how we feel about ourselves in situations where we are wronged, for example, and that being a cause of stress as well. So those are the four stages, right? So one being a neutral, two is when you perceive the stress or it begins, three is when you actually respond to that stress, four is when the stress is over. So now you finish that deadline, you've completed that task, you've had the conflict, whatever it is done, it's in the past now. And then you relax and then you go back to stage number one, which is a neutral. The reason why I'm doing this whole episode today on completing the stress cycle is that sometimes we do not do, or we do not acknowledge stage number four. Now, if we get to stage number four, the stressor has passed us, but we still feel emotionally attached or still feel on edge, or we can't get it out of our heads and we're still stressing about what could have happened, then we haven't completed that stress cycle. We haven't really completed it until we're back to a neutral stage. So, for example, if you find yourself being in an exam and afterwards, weeks afterwards, you still feel pressure, even though you've completed it. If you've gone from school to secondary school to uni to workplace, and they've all been high stressful situations, and then you go home and you're managing your family is a stressful situation as well, and then you go into your community and you see online that there's all kinds of horrible things happening around the world and that's a stressful situation, then you don't actually have an opportunity to get to stage 4, which is where you feel or you acknowledge that the stress has passed you, right? So today is about 5 ways to actually acknowledge that. Femi, we dealt, and I'm sure you can find someone better for president. I'll do what I do, but I'll do it well. Okay, so here are 5 ways to complete your stress cycle during burnout recovery. Okay, number 1 is really simple. It's recognizing that it's over, recognizing the progress, actually, right? So celebrating the small wins and the steps that you've taken towards overcoming burnout, right? So this might be that, okay, cool, I actually took a step back today. Yes, Grousey, what's going on? I actually took a step back today. There was an opportunity for me to fall into my usual pattern, but I broke that pattern today. I actually went for breaks. I actually had sleep. I actually ate well today. I hydrated. I approached someone when they wronged me. I booked that therapy session. um, I applied that Pomodoro technique with my working, whatever it is, like acknowledging your progress. I have done something towards me coming out of burnout, right? And it's important to do this because if we wait for the big wins, we're still going to be building up this stress within our bodies, right? But what we don't realize is we experience lots of small wins that we don't pay attention to. We just go on to the next one. I had a friend of mine yesterday who I actually had to stop and tell her win that day, something that she told me about yesterday. And I was like, listen, I'm going to need you to celebrate. I don't care what it is. You can jump around the house, you can do cartwheels, you can make a meal that you like, you can order in, you can call your friend or family, whatever you need to do. You can sing, shout, put on your favorite song. I really don't care. You can have some ice cream, whatever it is. You need to mark this occasion before you go on to the next thing, because that's what we end up doing. Something amazing will happen, something terrible will happen, and we just go on to the next thing. We don't even acknowledge that it happened. We don't deal with it emotionally, spiritually, physically. um Maybe I can coach the presidents. Yeah, exactly. Some of the presidents need coaching, especially back home. But yeah, so we need to recognize our progress. That's way number 1 to complete the stress cycle. Recognize it. In your self-care, whether it's seeking support. Okay, yeah, I called someone. Usually I deal with this by myself, but actually I went out and I made that phone call this time. I acknowledge that there are people in my circle that I can speak to about stuff, and I didn't try and hold in myself this time. All of those kind of things are important ways, right? So that's number 1. Recognize your progress. Number 2 is practice gratitude. This one for me is a superpower. I used to do this gratitude attitude every morning back in the day, but gratitude is such an important part of burnout recovery, is being grateful and appreciating what you have already. One of the things that can happen when we have a burnout is that we ruminate on the negatives. We continue to focus on the negatives. And the problem is what we focus on grows. So if there's something that's stressful coming out and that's coming up and that's the only thing we think about, then we could ignore all the other great things that are happening, which could balance out the stress. Okay. So sometimes, okay, we often do this, right? Oh, think of 3 things you're grateful for. And sometimes we don't really mean it. If we're honest with each other, those tasks and stuff can be kind of meaning. Okay, I'm really grateful for my shirt. I'm really grateful for my house. I'm really grateful for food, which are things that we should be grateful for because other people aren't as privileged enough to have it. But if you're already taking it for granted and we're just saying it because we need to do the exercise, then it's not going to have the effect we want. Gratitude comes from a deep knowing that you are in a place where you things could be so much worse, right? But it's actually just acknowledging what you have, just period, what you have, whether it's time, whether it's health, whether it's people around you, whatever that might be. But it's a deep knowing, not just a psychological, it's emotional. Like, one of the things for me that is really important about my gratitude practice is that if I need to say it 100 times for me to get an emotional response, then I will. Okay. If I wake up one morning and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm happy for the TV. Why am I happy about the TV? I'm able to be kept up to date with what's happening around the world. Why is that important to me? Okay, it's important to me because I feel connection. And when I live alone, it's difficult to get that. Okay, why is that important? Because I'm a ambivert. I Not only do I experience energy from myself, I also experience it from other people. And sometimes, if those people aren't there in the physical, at least I can connect with people in a digital. Whatever it is, when I start to go really down that road, then is when I start to feel the gratitude, right? You got to cultivate it, right? You have to till the soil, as the root of the word is to cultivate, right? You have to do something. It's an active word to build gratitude. It doesn't Sometimes it doesn't happen by accident. We naturally have, what is it, like 60, 70,000 thoughts, and 80% of those are negative, but on average. Like, we need to do an active revamp of our mindset and just focus on the positive to be able to get balance. And this doesn't mean ignoring the negative. It means appreciating that there are positives as well as the negatives, right? And also acknowledge the improvements that you've experienced and you've done through your recovery, right? Okay, cool. I may not have got to 100%, but I'm actually at 50. Okay, cool. So I was aiming for 80, but I'm at 75. That's really good. One of the things about perfectionism that I've spoken about before is the risk with it is that perfectionists only focus on 100% or zero. If it's not 100%, it's nothing. And the problem with that is you don't appreciate the incremental improvements. We are grateful for the insights that these lives have helped us to think about. Thank you. I appreciate that. I like that feedback. And if there's anything as well that is helpful, let me know. Put it in the comments. If there's any topics and stuff you want me to cover, put it in the comments as well. How you doing, Cara? Welcome. So, where was I? Focus on the things you've accomplished rather than what still needs to be done, right? Because your mind is going to go on to the things that still need to be done anyway. That is going to be, whether you're actively thinking about it or passively, your mind is going to look to the negatives. Us as human beings, we actually sometimes look for that actively. But I think in hindsight, it's an actual human condition, because when we look for the negatives, then we can prepare for it. And I think it's our inner self trying to protect ourselves. What are the dangers? What are the threats? And how can I be, prepared against them? So I wouldn't necessarily use the idea that we think so much about the negatives or the possibilities of things going wrong. But we also need to acknowledge that stuff almost happens by default. We need to actively think about the positive stuff sometimes. And like a muscle, we need to train it so that when there's an opportunity in the road and it forks, on the left is negative, on the right is positive. We have just as much choice to go into the positive as we do into the negative. Without doing it consciously, that won't happen. The third thing you can do to complete your stress cycle is reward yourself. And there's loads of ways we can do that. This is probably one of the biggest, most obvious ones. Treat yourself, right? And you can do this in loads of ways. Like, some people, you can do it with self-care rituals. You can go for a run and physical activity. You go dance. You can do something creative like painting, singing, pick up a class you like. You can meet a friend or go to any other kind of like connect. You can sleep, like something like that. You can journal. Um, you can set your boundaries. You can do whatever it is you need to do, but it's to reward yourself. What are the things that I would really be able to celebrate and say, if I was a separate being, what would I do for that person to let them know how grateful I am for them, how proud I am of them? And what would you do? Would you take them out for a meal? Would you take them to the cinema? Would you clear their afternoon and go for a walk with them? Like, what would you do? And do those things for yourself when you start to see those improvements, right? Reward yourself. It could be a bubble bath. I used to love bubble baths. The only thing that I don't like about my current place of living is that it doesn't have a bathtub, because I'd have a bubble bath all the time, right? What are you going to do to celebrate yourself? When are you going to celebrate yourself? You've had enough of these cycles now, which you've missed the opportunity to celebrate yourself with. So choose something now. Think about something you've achieved recently that you haven't actually acknowledged, and reward yourself for achieving that, no matter how small, no matter how big, right? Are you going to get a skipping rope? Like, one of the things I did last year was I went roller skating, right? Just went roller skating. I was like, I had a really tough month, but that month is over and I survived. I'm going to do something fun. Went roller skating, right? So what is it that you can do to reward yourself? Number 4 on things you can do to complete your stress cycle during your burnout recovery. And this one for me is maybe one of my favorites, is to share your wins. Like I've talked about before, how important it is for us to commune with other people. Communication is an important part of our experience. It's not just communication with yourself, but also communication with other people. Share your wins, let them know, share in the victories. And this is when you actually realize who's for you and who isn't, right? Do you, the people around you, celebrate your wins with you, or are they jealous, or do they try and sabotage, right? So pay attention to those things. When you have a success or a milestone that you've reached, share it with your trusted friends, right? Your family members, your support groups. Get encouragement, validation from them, and recognition from your hard work. You've probably spent time telling them about how stressful this has been, this period. You've been really struggling. You've cried on their shoulder. You've hurt next to them, like, you've been sitting there bleeding, right? And they've been there for you through the hard times. Now when things are successful, let them know, let them be there for you through the successful times as well. And there's nothing more satisfying than being there for a friend when they're in the heavy, deep, darkest points, but then also being able to celebrate it with them when they get to the top of the mountaintop, right? Topic: 5 ways to develop healthy relationships, 5 ways to keep motivated. I've actually done 5 ways to develop healthy relationships already, but I'll definitely have a think about 5 ways to keep motivated. There's a lot more than 5, I tell you that. But yeah, I'll get to that. I don't know. We'll see. I'll have a think. So yeah, it's also part of resilience, because we're not designed to do all this alone. I've talked about this before. We, as especially if you're a giver, you might, or you're the person who people always rely on, you might have find it difficult to accept help, right? Which means that it's difficult for you to share as well, because you think you might be burdening them when things are in the low states. But it's important to actually do that, so that when things are in the, you get to reap the benefits with other people as well, right? It actually builds connection. It's not just the terrible things that help us build connection, it's also the celebrating, right? Think about the times when you traveled with friends of yours after sixth form, or you have a year out and you go to a random place in the world and you meet people and you celebrate, and you realize they're all celebrating as well, and you might have a celebration around the campfire one day. All those things are good examples of how we connect with people in the good times as well as the bad. As you're making your steps towards recovering from burnout, and you make these little increments of improvements, celebrate it with your friends, celebrate it with your family, celebrate it with your community, share your wins, right? A win shared is a win doubled. And number 5, the last one I'll talk about today in terms of ways to complete your stress cycle during burnout recovery. And this one is it might be a it might be a bit woo, but it is, for me, it's really important in terms of the growth as well. And it's to reflect on your growth. You have gone through something and you've come out the other side a changed person. Very rarely, and I'd say probably never, do we go through something where it doesn't change something in us. We learn something about ourselves, we learn something about other people, we learn something about the way the world works, right? Sometimes we might have been hurt, but through healing, we've grown stronger, more resilient. Sometimes we might have lost someone and we've gone through grief, but now we're at a stage where we're getting functional again, and we're actually experiencing joy for the first time in a long time. Like, what does that feel like? You know, reflect on your growth, reflect on what has changed within you. There's a quote by Octavia Butler: everything we touch Everything that we touch, we change. Everything that changes us. The only lasting thing is change. Something along those lines. I'm butchering the quote now. The idea is change is constant, and growth happens through change. Growth doesn't happen by staying the same. And so sometimes you might have found that looking back over your life, there might have been times of deep stress, right? Deep troubles, deep hurt, and you didn't even know if you were going to make it. But now looking back, you might be able to say now in hindsight that that was probably something that made you stronger. Something that you wouldn't have changed for the world, because now you realize what you've learned from that experience. Like I have a couple of partners in business, and one of the things that they said to me is like, they would tell me certain things that will help me along on my journey, and they will watch me do my thing and then run into a brick wall, and then find myself doing the thing that they told me about in the first place. And when I go back to them and say, yeah, you watched me run into that wall, yeah, and they're like, well, you did that to yourself. Sometimes just talking about it isn't going to be enough for you to learn the lesson. Sometimes you need to actually experience it for yourself, right? And it's really important to look at that for the history. Actually think about it. Things that we thought would be the end of us weren't. And you're still here, still swinging, still taking on another day. And it might not be easy, but you're still here despite that. And so reflect on that growth and take some time. Like that might be a moment. It might be actually just sitting there and thinking like, wow, I actually did that. Or, oh, wow, like I was really in a terrible place. I didn't realize how bad I was until I got out of it. It might be you taking a day out, a week, a month, a year, and just reflecting on things. It might be like a review you do at the end of each month and say, where am I physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in terms of my career, in terms of anything? Yes, Nelza. Um, so find ways for you to reflect on your growth, because we're growing every day. And sometimes some of the hardest things we experience make us grow the most. So reflect on that. Take time to reflect on it, how far you've come. I was speaking to a friend of mine who was going through a really tough time. And I did a really small exercise. We were standing on her balcony. And I said, if you were to say where you're trying to end up, where would it be? Like, how far are we? And then she was like, yeah, it's probably that house on the other side of the road. I said, okay, cool. So that is where you're trying to get to. I said, yeah. She said, yeah. I said, okay, let's turn around. So we turned around, and I said, if you were to look at where you were at the beginning of the journey, where would that be? And she said, well, I'm not even sure if it's in the same country. And I said, exactly. A lot of the times we're continuously growing every day, every moment. We're learning all these things, but because we're only looking forward at where we're trying to get to, we honestly don't appreciate how far we've come. And so reflecting on your growth can be such an important part of recovering from burnout, because you can actually see what you've done, what you've achieved, right? The things that you might have missed because you've been focused so much on what's going wrong, right? Recognize that personal growth, that resilience, the strength you've developed along the way, and celebrate the small victories. Celebrate them, please. If there's anything you've learned from today, celebrate the small wins. Don't wait until you've completed the thing, or completed life before you do anything. It's like I feel like the idea of retirement is a good example of that. We wait until we're 65 or something. I can't remember what year it is right now, before we actually retire and celebrate, like properly use the fact that we've been working and building up our wealth. Half of us won't even reach that year, that age. Half of us won't even reach the age to be able to retire, but we're continuously working, continuously grinding. A better way, I think, is to celebrate on a daily or a monthly or a weekly. Find ways for us to celebrate or take mini retirements. If you're going from one job to another, leave a month out. Save enough so that you've got a little bit of a pocket, so that you can do a little bit of traveling every now and again. When you're taking your time off from work, take it as time off from work as opposed to time off to do something else. What can you do? Like what would actually give you the experience of growth, or be able to give you the time to reflect? Think about that for yourself, because your answer might be different from mine. Definitely celebrate the small wins daily. And even if that means just writing down in a book, all the things that all your wins. One of the things I had, I I think it's on my windowsill, is a gratitude jar. And it's basically whenever I do something that I'm proud of. And so, for example, these lives are one of them. I would write it down on a little piece of paper, roll up the little piece of paper and put it in the jar. And the idea is that on the new year, I would open it up and just read through all these things and just get a sense of all these wins. Well, that's how it started off. Now it's whenever I get to a stage where I do feel like I need to remind myself of what I've been doing and the wins, I just read it. Like I don't need to wait for New Year's to do it anymore. I just open that jar and be like, oh man, I've achieved some incredible things this year already, right? Don't wait until the end before you celebrate all the things you've been doing since. Okay. Celebrate the small victories. And Michelle, you were talking about how to stay motivated. This is one of them. Celebrating the wins, acknowledging the wins that you've been having, right? Don't wait until it's over before you acknowledge it. Like as things are happening, celebrate them. Okay, keep yourself inspired that way as well and committed to the healing process. So if you think about it this way, if you are to decide that you're going to lose weight or gain weight or get to your target weight, and you're only going to acknowledge that anything is happening when the target weight is met, then you're not going to acknowledge every pound you lose or every pound you gain, depending on what your target is, right? So for example, me, I might want to put on muscle, right? And I want to get to a certain physique. Someone else might want to lose weight and get to a certain physique, right? But what about every day when you weigh yourself on a scale and you see that you're incrementally getting closer towards your target and you don't do anything? You're just like, okay, cool, I've just lost another pound and walk out the door. No, that's a win. That means that whatever you're doing is working. Celebrate that. And that helps you be committed. It helps you be like it gives you that hit of dopamine that you're achieving something that can help you keep committed. Because if you're doing stuff over and over again and you're not celebrating the wins and you're not even acknowledging that there's any kind of change, how long do you think that's going to last before you get tired of doing it? One of the things for me about that's been difficult about these lives is I've been doing it consistently every single day for the month, right? Some days have been later than others. The idea was to do it before work, right? This is like at the end of the day. I am still celebrating the fact that I did this live. Just because it wasn't at 6 o'clock in the morning doesn't mean it's not worth celebrating, right? And there's these things about consistency, for example, where it says, people think consistency looks like this, and it's like 5 full jars. But then the next line is consistency actually looks like this: like want to be full, want to be half empty, want to be a quarter empty, want to be 3/4 full, other want to be full, right? It ranges, but the fact that you keep going, whatever capacity, is consistency. It is a win, and those wins need to be celebrated. Michelle says, I would love to have healthy friendships. That's why I gave that topic. Maybe you can share the points with me in my inbox. Yeah, sure. I'll look through because this is on Instagram Live, right? So if you look through my reels, you'll be able to see the titles of what I've done. So I think there was one on building relationships. So if you can't see it, I'll send it to your inbox. Yes, Felix. Yes, Nicole Latouche in the building. Welcome. And that's it for today. Okay. So the 5 ways to complete your stress cycle during burnout recovery. Number one is recognizing your progress, first of all, right? Acknowledge it that you've done an amazing job, right? Despite the odds. Number two is practice gratitude. It's a superpower. It gets your focus on what's happening right while not ignoring what's not happening right. Number three is reward yourself. Don't wait until you're completely done before you actually start, taking yourself out on a meal or a date or whatever it might be that reward yourself. Don't wait till the end. Don't wait till you're 65 to retire to go traveling, right? Do mini retirements. Number four is share your wins. A win shared is a win doubled, right? Share your wins, share it with the people. Don't let the people around you only really be with you when you're in the valley. When you're at the top of the mountain, celebrate there as well. And number 5 is reflect on your growth. Like, acknowledge the little wins that you've been having. Okay. So, yes, Bintu, long time. So that's it. And if you need help on that, just DM me if you're on Instagram. And if you're on LinkedIn, book with me. There, and a QR code. And 30 minutes. If you DM me, I'll send you the link. You can book some time with me. It's 30 minutes and we talk about your experience with burnout and how I can help. There's the things that I'm doing which could be useful to you, and by having a conversation with you, be able to see what is the most useful one. But whatever it is, whether it's with me or with someone else, make sure you do something about it. And if there's one thing you take away from today, is to celebrate your wins. Don't be going through life achieving incredible things, facing incredible challenges, and not acknowledge that you've been doing so. Right? Good. It's me speaking to you like an older brother. All right. I'll see you tomorrow for the final, the final episode of Ikdame Burnout series for the month of May, which is mental health awareness.